Hi, and welcome to the American University Internet Governance Lab Alumni Interview Series. I am Rhea Khurana, a junior fellow at this lab, as well as a first year at American University School of International Service, and I'm majoring in international relations. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Ms. Gayatri Murthy, an American University alumni who graduated with a master's degrees in international communication from the School of International Service. Ms. Murthy has dedicated her career to researching and consulting on what low-income people want and how digital technologies can help fill the gaps to financial inclusion. Whether it be from her work at Intermedia and Give India, Ms. Murthy's research has contributed to gaining further insight into the budding relationship between technology and financial inclusion while changing many lives in the process. She currently works as a financial sector specialist at the Consultative Group to assist the poor, focusing on providing information that can be applied on topics such as inclusive tech-based business models or pro-poor data protection. At her current position, she continues her passion of deploying a diverse toolbox of research methods to understanding the lives of low-income people, so that emerging insights compel us to transform policy, private sector, and funding. Ms. Murthy, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me virtually today.
Thanks, my pleasure.
I'd like to first inquire about your time at American University. So I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about what your experience was like at American University.
Thanks. So started my master's program in the fall of 2007. So a long time ago, but it was a pretty amazing time to be studying and to kind of arrive in this city. So I actually arrived all the way from Mumbai in India. And so it was my first time kind of being in the US and then obviously studying in a US at a US institution. And my master's program completely coincided with the US presidential election. So, it was a great time to be in the city and to see the election of, the first US Black president, and Obama being one of the kind of speakers who actually came to the AU basketball court. And, I saw him being endorsed by Ted Kennedy
Wow.
live. So that was quite like kind of fabulous experience underlying all of my academic work. It taught me a lot. I think studying at the time, we were just beginning to think of what role technologies would play in development. So it was a very exciting time to be studying the intersection of tech and development issues, poverty issues, as well as cross-cultural issues. So how do you make things work across geographies, socio-political and economic differences? So I really enjoyed that multidimensional view to my academics. It was also equally important to be studying with a cohort of people who had had such a who had had diverse experiences. So overall, I really think of my graduate experience at AU as an opening up of my mind and kind of a setting up of the future I've ended up having. It kind of all started off, and I would be the one thing I think I would add is I also had a wonderful internship at WAMU, so at the local NPR station, and that also opened my mind to various things in the city. So I really had a fabulous experience. Wouldn't change it for anything.
Oh wow, well that was all so nice to hear. And I'm glad that to hear that you enjoyed your time at American, and what an interesting time, yes, to be a student right around the presidential election of Barack Obama. Wow. And I was wondering if you could tell me how your time at American University prepared you for your current job.
I've thought about that in the past, and I think three things come to mind in no particular order. But the first thing is I think my master's program was in my degree ended up being international communications. I was at the School of International Service, but I studied international relations from a communications perspective. And what that ended up really doing is it sharpened my ability to speak um, my truth or my learnings to a very diverse set of people. And I can't underscore how important that skill has been, whether it is speaking through a blog, through a webinar, through a paper at a conference, just being able to distill what we know, knowledge into kind of actionable insight is a huge skill that I learned at American University. And I can't stress how important that remains in almost any job you do. Um, I think a lot of students at and at this SIS really value the international dimension we get. It really opens up careers at places like the World Bank where I work now, because you become equipped not just seeing the world from where you sit, but you through your classrooms, through your professors, through the experience the city has to offer, you really are able to take things from different parts of your knowledge and learning and apply it. So being able to look at poverty issues through the lens of not just what's happening in my home country, India, but also in Washington, D.C., not just looking at development as an economic issue, but also looking at it from various other dimensions. So I think the multidimensional nature of our academics, the way the strong communication skills, I think really shaped me. And then finally, kind of SIS and American University in general has a strong, I think, focus on social change, on looking at things as not just you know not just looking at things from here's capitalism and globalization just going willy-nilly, but actually seeing like what impact we're having on the world. I mean, so that kind of lens on social change also really shapes how I think about my work.
Oh wow, well, I definitely have to agree. Yeah, they instill the multidimensional aspects here at SIS, and I've experienced that, looking at things from different perspectives, getting an idea that okay, we don't just look at this from either Eurocentric view, but we have to also look at what different countries such as India and other countries in Asia, Africa, how they see these issues, and how as an international community, how we can work together towards solve different problems while acknowledging different perspectives. So I would have to agree. I feel like that is an important part. And I was wondering, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give your American University student version of you?
So I've thought about the person I was when I was just graduating, because um, I graduated in the spring of 2009, which was when the US economy here was really reeling from another big shock, the economic recession. And life was really tough. And, when the pandemic began last year, I did a few guest lectures in, certain online kind of, because we were all online, I did a couple of guest lectures for students who were graduating, and I was talking about various things about my work. And I remember telling them, like, I felt similarly, like graduating at a time when everything seems to be going wrong is was really tough for me, and it was hard for me to find a job, particularly as an Indian, not being an American citizen made it that much harder. So I think I would have to say that I had a lot of naivete coming out, because I had yet to learn so much of what life taught me so far. But I would tell that person that good things are going to happen if you continue to expand your mind. And I think that's what I would say.
Wow, well, that was so inspiring. That was nice to hear. Wow, yeah. And coinciding with how you graduated during a time of recession and what graduates now have to face, I'm sure many students can relate to that as well. Well, now after talking about your experience, quick talk about your experience at American, I'd like to come over to your current work in research. And I was wondering if you could tell me what fintech innovations do you believe will be the most helpful for the financial inclusion of low-income people in the future?
So fintech, for those of us who may not be as familiar with that word, is essentially the use of technology in creating and delivering financial services to people around the world. So think of how we all use things like Venmo or PayPal or Stripe in this country, as being part of this giant fintech revolution we're all a part of. And technology affects almost everything, and so it affects finance. Why it becomes important for something like solving financial inclusion or poverty issues is that technology is able to make financial products more accessible and cheaper for low income people. So when you can end up doing things like payments and banking on a phone, that means that not only does that mean that it's more accessible to you as a customer, but it's also cheaper for that bank or that company to serve you, because actually getting you financial services to where you are by through a brick and mortar bank branch is actually very expensive for the bank. And so that's been a huge barrier for them serving poor people to begin with. So I think technology, what that does is it reduces the cost to serve and therefore makes services more accessible to people. So nowadays you hear of people being able to access loans and insurance on just on the tap on their phone. They don't even need to have a large bank branch near them. Second, I think technology, because all of us live our lives online, technology makes us more visible, and therefore which can be a bad thing for privacy issues, but if used responsibly can be a great way for us to be proven credit worthy or risk worthy by a financial institution. So the reason often we're not able to lend to people with a bad credit history is that it's too risky. But if technology can help show that people are able to improve their behavior or even create credit behavior online or responsible behavior online, then even they can be provided with more complex services like credit, like insurance, which is not the same as giving someone a Venmo account. And then finally, I mean, all this is fine, but it should also be kind of connected to people's well-being. So it's not enough to just like flood people with loans, whether it's digital or not, but that it should actually help them in their work and livelihood. So, good credit products and good payment products help, for instance, small businesses grow. The only way, our businesses in the past have grown is because they've been given access to finance to grow themselves, to take one branch and make 5 branches out of it, or from selling 10 pairs of jeans to be able to sell 100 pairs of jeans in a month, requires capital. So it's not just like, okay, let's just flood the system with money and loans for everyone so that everyone goes um, runs crazy with credit, but it should be tied to bigger impact goals. There's a big credit company in the US now called SoFi, which has grown because it was able to provide loans to students trying to get an education, which is, finance is a huge barrier to being able to get an education in the US. So things like that, like people's employment, people's business growth, people's education, all of these challenges can be better solved if technology plays a responsible role in the space of financial services. So that's been my work for the last few years.
Wow, that's very, very interesting and impressive. Yeah, so essentially the technology's importance is in its adaptability and its ability to essentially be used anywhere across in the globe and provide these resources and these functions to those who aren't able to maybe easily access them from say a brick and mortar store and everything. Wow. Very interesting indeed. And so, going off of that, I think, and narrowing the topic down a bit, I've been studying blockchain technology and cryptocurrency and its ability to, I mean, its emergence in the fintech sector has been a big in the news and such. And there's been conversation about its potential ability to help with financial inclusion and possibly even extend far past into like humanitarian, like international development and such. So I was wondering, do you think blockchain technologies such as cryptocurrency could be utilized or contribute towards filling the gaps for financial inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, short answer is yes, but I think it will take us time to understand exactly how. So think of any technology, even things that you and I use, like a smartphone. Think of, the trajectory that innovation has taken to be able to reach where it is today. It's kind of like you think of a plane taking off. When it first takes off, like, there's a certain amount of things that are possible, and then at some point there's innovation on innovation on innovation, and at one point the plane takes off because enough innovation has happened for that technology to become really big and really accessible. When the iPhones first came out, a very few set of people could afford it, but slowly smartphones in general have become more and more accessible worldwide. And with that, what happens is more and more people can benefit. But it takes time. Where we're standing with things like cryptocurrency and blockchain, I think we're at the beginning of our experimentation and understanding of its value. So, what is its value, right? So, in essence, what these technologies do is they help build trust, and they help create kind of um, set of identities that are not possible, so and cannot, and then once created cannot be violated. So why is that helpful for situations like financial inclusion or a refugee crisis? Is because in those situations the people involved lose those things or lose their identities, or don't have access to kind of are not credit worthy or trustworthy yet. So how do you actually get them services if they don't exist in any systems, and those systems can't be queried? So like unless you have really good ID systems, and then on top of that you layer people's behavior, that's how you assess people and give them finance. But if you have none of those things, how do you help people? So I think that's the future of some of these technologies if we develop them well enough. But I don't think we're fully there yet. I think experiments exist and we're curious about them, but we're still a while ways away before these technologies become useful for such problems in a scalable way. I think what we need to do now, or the creators of these, or the designers of this world need to do, is they need to understand the problems they're solving well. So you need to understand how someone in a refugee camp may or may not, who are you dealing with? And I think those things are, we're yet to figure some of that stuff out. So you need innovators come in who are from the places that we're trying to solve problems for. So if there are blockchain innovators coming out of emerging markets, I think that's when we'll start to see solutions that work for excluded groups. So far, I would say it's more applicable in a more developed world context, with some curiosity for this being a big game changer. So I think it's coming, but not quite yet.
Right, yes. It still needs that innovation to figure out those fine details and then be able to be applied and transferred into countries who may not and essentially understand how this technology functions, and possibly the education of the technology and of technology in general and the functions needs to probably be increased before it's implemented into like such a developing country or places where it could be used for potentially financial inclusion. Understood. Yeah. Makes sense. And so I know that aside from just researching into financial inclusion, your work has also focused on data protection as well. So I was wondering if you could elaborate possibly on how do you think blockchain technology, or apart from that, possibly emerging technologies, will have a role in data protection?
Hmm. So again, data protection is a area, or data privacy in general is an area that's rapidly changing, and our views on what works and what doesn't is has been really shaped by the events of the last 5 years, 6 years. Like a lot has changed on this, right? And it has to do with how much data and information is flowing through our smartphones and the technologies we use on a daily basis. What seems to be happening on data protection is that the regulation and the policies are just about catching up with where the technologies are going, right? Like a large part of data protection today is based on consent that you and I provide before we start using an app. Now, it's anybody's guess how many of us read that consent notice or those terms and conditions before we start using an app. I mean, studies show that 99% of us don't read it. And I would almost say, like, I'm pretty sure 100% of people don't read it. Like, how many apps do we have on our phone? Like 70, 80 apps. How many privacy notices have we read? Like, I think it's zero. So nobody reads that, right? Yet it's the basis of how data privacy happens. Now, when large breaches start to happen and large kind of um, errors or threats begin to show up like they have in the last few years, then there's some consciousness in the general public, and then companies take notice, and so you'll see big tech companies making lots of changes to the way their customers can change or set up their privacy. Now, all of this, if what happens when you take all of this into the emerging markets and developing markets of the world, what's happening there? Now, what's happening there is many of those countries are at the cusp of bringing large sections of their population online for the first time, whether it's through two, three kinds of things. First is a lot of countries are creating sophisticated ID systems. I mean, the most famous of this is like India's Aadhaar cards, which, is a unique number that not only exists for every Indian now, but is also a database that can be searched and queried and connected. So it's not just a static ID like the Social Security card in the US, but that it actually can connect a whole set of it can connect to your bank account, to your cell phone, to your loans, to your health accounts. It can connect all those things so that you become a fully known entity in a responsible way to whoever wants to know you. So there's a lot of that.
Systems to a number.
Sorry?
Essentially, sort of like how an email can connect to your drive or to, your accounts in different ways, connecting it to that one number.
Exactly. But your email is not unique in the sense
Right.
that it is unique to you, but it's not irrevocable in that way that an ID system is.
Right.
And obviously, the Aadhaar system is also biometric, so it also is very unique in the sense that it's your like kind of unique identity. Of course, that poses huge logistical and privacy issues, but it's a huge achievement in itself, and presents a huge change in society in India, but also as an example globally. Many other countries, like ranging from Ghana to the Philippines, are doing similar ID exercises today. So you have a large number of people coming kind of online or becoming visible through ID systems. A lot of countries are doing kind of these mandatory bank account creations, which means that almost every citizen in that market either has a unique bank account or a unique mobile money account. So they can be sent money, or they can use that to kind of do transactions. So why is that relevant? That's relevant for like government payments. People do, especially times like COVID, like you think of these stimulus checks, etc. Like the US system actually is not as advanced as some of the things happening in certain markets we look at. Like in India, like with the flick of a switch, India can transfer a large section of its population money in a day. And that capability has been growing in the last decade or so. And then third, I think a lot of just what we've seen in the world is like a transformative rise in smartphone and just phone ownership, but also smartphone ownership. So many markets like Indonesia, India, South Africa, Nigeria, in these markets, like more than half the population, or well, anywhere from 20 to 60% of the populations are acquiring smartphones. So all this adds up to like a large sections of their society coming visible, coming online for the first time. And that's a unique business opportunity and an impact opportunity that everyone's looking into, right? Okay, like now let's give them a whole bunch of apps. Now let's connect everything to everything to everything. And so that is at once a huge opportunity and a data protection risk at the same time. Now, the biggest debate happening in development is that poor people don't care about their privacy because they're getting so many other things. And I think that's a bit of a condescending argument to make, that, oh, those people, they don't care. You should care about your privacy, but that poor businesswoman there, no, her privacy doesn't matter. Just give her a loan. So I think there's a bit of I don't necessarily fully buy into that. Binary view, and I think we should stop thinking about the world as rich world, poor world, as having two separate standards. Instead, what we argue for is that countries that are, the Google research kind of language calls these people the next billion, which is like it's the next billion people coming online. And I do think that data protection needs to keep up. So I don't think India or the US should not be relying on consent as a way to do data protection. We need new systems. I think private sector companies need to be held to higher standards of being responsible, and we need to shift the onus a bit towards them. And there are certain measures that go there, like the EU's GDPR that came out a few years ago takes one or two steps in that direction, although it's not
Mhm.
nearly transformational enough. So I think data protection for tomorrow needs to shift the onus from the end user to like some of the so the people collecting our data. They need to be a little more responsible, and some of that responsibility needs to sit with them. I think we need new ways of data protection. It can't be like this kind of old school, like let's complain then someone takes action. I think
Mhm.
just like we have artificial intelligence on this on the private sector side, we need artificial intelligence for data protection and privacy on the regulator side as
Right.
well. It's going to get, because no one has the capacity. Like, can you think of any government agency, any privacy department anywhere having the capacity to monitor
Those
like
billions of people.
complaints or
Yeah.
like breaches? Like, it's insane. So
Mhm.
I think we need smart solutions there. So I think a lot of that can be supported by blockchain, but I really worry about whether governments currently have the capacity to absorb that kind of technology into their regulation and supervision.
Mhm.
So I think it's going to take some time. Again, I think we're standing at the cusp of many of these technologies being relevant, and we still need to take that leap that will get us there.
Wow. Yes. Well, that definitely, I agree with that as well. I mean, the work you're doing here is so, it's in such a big hot topic in the news. I mean, you hear about this conversation all the time. It's definitely one that governments are now having to pay attention to. And I know the Biden administration has a plan on taking like a bigger charge with technology, but there's definitely a long ways to go for their that learning and that capacity to be there in order to solve and assess such problems that or such issues that are arriving. Like it seems like they're
Yeah.
ahead of the game then, and
Well,
there's
I
catching
think
up to do.
Yeah, I think there is goodwill in the present government to solve a lot of these issues, and
Mhm.
the recent coronavirus related packages, I think, even go into this area of UBI, universal basic income, by providing most American children at the bottom of the pyramid with like
Yeah.
stimulated government payments, and trying to see the effects of that on poverty reduction. I think some of those methods really are now being taken seriously in a way that is worth watching out for. I do think that a lot of US, you know, one thing we miss out in the innovation happening here is that a lot of fintech innovation in the US is based on the assumption that everyone has a bank account. And I
Mhm.
think we should really move past that as the framework for so a lot of this, like things like Venmo and PayPal, etc. They sit on top of you having a bank account. If you don't have a bank account, it's extremely expensive to use these services.
Right.
So I think the emerging market world, like the realities that you see in India and Kenya,
Mhm.
some of the solutions coming up there, and even in markets like Indonesia, are solving for you know a very different population where like 50% of people don't have a bank account. But I think it's not. I think by ignoring that in the US, we actually leave a lot of people behind. We leave a lot of people whose majority of their lives takes place in cash. And if we're not solving for that, if we're making it really tough for someone who earns in cash to input their money in their account and then use it, then we're actually not solving for the real pain points that low income people face. So I think we need better insight into like how the bottom 30% of Americans live, and what access to finance and digitization they have, whether it comes to my topic, finance, but also, as you've seen, education. Like, okay, you can move schools online because everyone has a smartphone, but not every try writing an essay on a smartphone. Like you
Yeah.
can't you can't take school online unless everyone has a laptop, right?
Right.
If you're going to write an essay, you can't do that
Mhm.
on a, no matter how great your tablet is. It's a huge pain in the ass to write 600 words like that. So I think we need to solve problems in a human centered way,
Mhm.
that I don't think we are quite there yet.
Right. Well, makes sense, definitely. Wow. I think just to kind of, it's been such an interesting, such an insightful conversation. Just to close up here, I mean, you went from master's in intercultural communication to exploring digital technology and financial inclusion. I was just wondering what inspired you to choose your career path of researching this topic, or did you always know?
No, I didn't know, and I don't think I was quite clueless because I went straight from my undergrad in India largely to my master's. So I didn't have a whole lot of work experience in forming my choices in grad school at all. I just kind of picked and chose classes that made sense to me at the time, uh, and mostly just enjoyed myself. But I, I think I always had an interest in working with. Um, I always had a research kind of interest. Like I always wanted to go out there and talk to people and understand how they lived and what they did. I mean, this is really what my core interest in life has been. And I was totally agnostic to whether I did that in healthcare or education or finance or culture, or like I kind of had an almost journalistic sense of what I wanted to do in life. Like I just wanted to find out the truth of other people's lives. So I think, like, I was always debating between my masters whether it should be in journalism or international relations, and I felt like this would international and intercultural relations would give me a good intersection between the things I love to do and making jobs out of it. Because, I think coming abroad, coming as an immigrant, I was also conscious like I needed to get into like a job market and be able to make a life out of it. So I think what I ended up studying really helped me kind of, it gave me at least a sense of the kinds of jobs and professions that I could go into. So um, um, if I studied, let's say, um, cross cultural communication and technology for development. And then I studied, um, I had a statistics class. I could put that all together into something like what I do. So I think I kind of just fell into various things. So from my masters, I went into doing a lot of research, and um, I took a lot of my work from my master's and made it very practical. Like, how do you actually do a survey? How do you do big focus groups? And eventually I fell into finance. So I think I'm a bit of an exception where I work. Like, I work with a lot of bankers and people who worked at banks or worked in consulting, whereas I bring a little more of I think, I bring a more of a kind of leftist, socialist, poverty, research based view into my work. So yeah, I wouldn't say I had a great sense of where I was going. I kind of fell into things, but definitely I use a lot of what I studied in my work. Yeah.
Wow, well, this is such an interesting conversation, and I really want to thank you for our amazing alumni, Ms. Gayatri Murthy, for taking the time to share your story with us. I mean, we had such a wide range of topics throughout this entire conversation, from your American University experience to discussing, I mean, the application of fintech and where it's going potentially, how there's room for innovation, but there's definitely a future for it. We went to data protection, about ID identification, relating it back to potentially where blockchain technology has its role in fintech and financial inclusion. This whole range up. I really want to thank you today for talking with me about all this, and it was so nice to speak with you. And please check out our other interviews in the American University Internet Governance Lab Alumni Interview Series, available on the lab's website. And thank you, Ms. Gayatri Murthy.
Thanks, Ria.